Hello, everybody. Nadav Tzafrir, always a very tough act to follow. Thought I'd kick off by introducing myself very briefly and telling you a little bit about the world as I see it. We've spoken a lot about the new age of offense, the new age of defense, the new capabilities required, the new domains of investment. I wanted to take an opportunity to zoom out a little bit and talk about markets that are beyond what we typically consider as Israeli entrepreneurs, investors, and practitioners. So by way of very quick introduction, Aaron Applbaum, I have spent the last 8 years building a venture capital fund predicated on taking early stage Israeli technology companies global. MizMaa stands for Mizrach Ma'arav, which is a portmanteau for two words that describe the very fact that Israel is a small market with outsized technologies that when brought to international communities and customers has outsized impact. One of the things that I've been saying over the course of the last, call it year and a half, but exaggerated in the last 6 months, is that the number and quality of entrepreneurs who are deciding to go into the domains of hard tech, deep tech, and defense in particular has grown. We heard from Yiftach Schulman earlier today. We will hear from him again. This is a technology leader on his third company who's built one of the most impressive and important companies in Israel in the world of databases, who's going back in to start from zero to go and build what will be the next generation prime. That's a sea change. That's a fundamental shift in where our best talents are headed. And so as we examine the reason why someone like a Yiftach or someone like an Amikam Norkin, who we also heard from earlier, would spend time when they don't need to or they don't have to in this domain, I'd like to zoom out for a second to understand what defense markets are, what they look like, and why we need to consider, as the title would suggest, this movement east. In 2024, global defense spend was $2.7 trillion, which is an almost 10% increase from 2023. These aren't increases, these aren't CAGRs that we're seeing in any other domain. And part of the reason that I'm spending so much time thinking about what this world looks like to the east is because if you look at the dynamics of the market, the United States, which is not only the biggest economy in the world, but also the largest spender in defense, accounts for $850 billion of that almost $3 trillion. What's really important is that there's a fundamental shakeup in the dynamics of how money is starting to flow through the system. You've heard on this stage earlier today this notion of America first, which as a dual citizen and as American, on one half of me understands and the other half of me is very frightened by. You're seeing the global response to America first. You're seeing the global response to what it means for onshore and nearshore and single source in the United States. You're seeing Germany come online to the tune of $200 billion over the next 5 years. Japan coming online. You're seeing India spending at record levels. You're seeing, and so what I'm here to discuss and part of what I'm going to describe to you are real adventures I've taken, real trips over the course of this last year in speaking to the stakeholders in various countries around the world that have had to wake up because of tariffs and because of the uncertainty that this new administration brings. There are new budgets and new concerns. This past year, I've traveled twice to Abu Dhabi. I've been to Australia. I've been to Singapore. I've been to Korea. I've been to the United Arab Emirates. I've been to Saudi Arabia, all of whom are looking at US exports and realizing that if they build their stack based on American technology alone, there's uncertainty as to whether or not they'll be able to fight their battles of the future. Coupled with the fact that Israel shares more in common from a technology and from a need standpoint with these Eastern countries than it does with the United States. The United States is enormous and largely self-sufficient and doesn't have enemies on its borders. That's not the same for Saudi Arabia, where I'd like to start this conversation. It's a little bit of a taboo topic since we don't have diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia, but they're going to spend $79 billion in this coming year on defense. Unlike most defense ecosystems, Saudi will spend the predominance of it on modernization. What does that mean? That means autonomous systems. That means electronic warfare. That means drone anti-drone. The next generation of issues are their today generation. One of the things we share in common with Saudi Arabia is a common enemy. Iran and its proxies, and in particular the Houthis, who the Saudi Arabians have been trying to battle and defeat for decades in various instantiations, can borrow a lot from what we understand and know about those countries, about those threats, about those infrastructures. And so it's incumbent on us as the engine of innovation in the world of defense to understand what the Saudi needs are, to answer those needs, to take advantage of the budgets that are made available and are growing. And it's a difficult one in Saudi in particular because we don't have a method or a means by which to partner with them today. Moving slightly further east, which will be a theme of this very brief talk, we find ourselves in the United Arab Emirates, which is a very interesting beast. On one hand, it's less than a third the size of Saudi in terms of its military spend. On the other hand, it's an allied country that has one of the fastest growing primes, as we heard earlier this morning, Ayal, what a prime is, one of the fastest growing primes in the world. Edge, which was a $2.5 billion revenue company last year, is a $5 billion output company this year, on its way to 20 by 2030. These are astronomic numbers, astronomic growth. And one of the interesting things, again, like I mentioned with Saudis, we have common enemies and common needs. The collaboration between the United Arab Emirates and Israel is already far more cemented. They're already buying Hermes 900s from Elbit. But it's an enormous opportunity for the early stage tech community, for the startup community to start to answer the questions that the Emiratis have. One of the important things I'll mention there is their number one concern as a country entirely dependent on oil and gas as the driver of its economy, similar, by the way, to Saudi Arabia, is the primary vector that they're nervous about, in addition to kinetic issues, is cybersecurity, is artificial intelligence, is what it would look like if you had a day of downtime on one of their rigs. Turns out that their neighbor to the northwest is the global leader, as we just heard from Nadav Zafrir, in the domain that specifically targets their number one concern, their area. So our ability to develop and sell is unparalleled. It's exactly in Israel's sweet spot. As we travel a little bit further east to the country on the list that I haven't visited, we find ourselves in India. Now, India, as was previously mentioned by General Norkin, found itself in a week-long battle with its neighbor to the north, Pakistan. The issues that India finds itself in are much more akin to what we're seeing in the United States. Nuclear superpower with major naval concerns in the Indo-China Sea and in the Indian Ocean, where nuclear deterrence is more important than it is non-proliferation. And so what we see in India, and by the way, they spend just as much as Saudi Arabia with their 1 point whatever billion people, and what they're interested in is asymmetry. Pakistan, because of their smaller numbers, have resorted to terrorism, guerrilla warfare, things that we in Israel are very familiar with. The dynamic of nation state that also has terrorist capabilities and terrorist entities that act like nation states. These are problems we've addressed and that we've dealt with that you need to use AI for, and cyber for, and robotics, as we heard from Alfie earlier today, and unmanned systems to level the playing field of asymmetric warfare. The benefit of these sorts of collaborations between Israel and India, which are already ongoing, is nuclear war deterrence. That's the level of importance that Israel can play in regional and global peacekeeping. As we continue on a little bit further east, and I'll skip to the end and come back a little bit west, but I spent some time in Korea. And Korea has an interesting set of problems that will sound very familiar to the Israeli military-industrial complex that we've enhanced and been building towards over the last couple of years. There are enormous subterranean tunnels that North Korea is threatening South Korea with. That's an ongoing hot war that's been live over the course of the last 70 years. Korea also is looking at their manufacturing capability, looking at the United States, understanding there isn't a long-term stable partnership that they can believe will persist for the next 50 years in this new America First paradigm. And so they're contracting with the United Arab Emirates to build a 6th-generation strike fighter, an unimaginable and unheard of collaboration in the billions between two countries that previously had very little relationship one with the other. And Israel now has an opportunity to sit in the middle of that and to provide critical components in software, in sensors, in navigation, in cyber, in autonomous systems. And if we insert ourselves correctly, we're talking about a country that spends $46 billion a year and growing in defense. That is Korea. Singapore, I've moved us a little bit west, has a very deep relationship with Israel in the defense ecosystem, spends about $17 billion a year, cares about terrorism, they're on the tip of Malaysia, cares about cyber, cares about autonomous systems, knows they'll never be able to battle against the larger forces that surround them. I'd say I'm out of time, so I'll conclude with something very interesting. The United States is $850 billion, as I've mentioned. China and Russia are about $400 billion a year of spend. The countries I've just mentioned that we're already in process with to develop military relationships with, including Australia, where I've been this year, that spends $55 billion, and Japan, which spends $70, we're talking about a $370 billion a year addressable market to the east. Not to say we shouldn't consider the US, we need to sell, we need them to rely on us like we rely on them. It's critical and it's important for our next century of survival. But if we ignore the East, we're leaving money on the table, we're leaving opportunity on the table, and I'm here to say that it's a truly global market with truly global demand that we can fulfill. So thank you all very much for your time.